If you're watching this channel, it's because you don't enjoy watching the world squander what Christendom built, but you want to do your part. And chances are you've heard me mention a great means by doing just that. Email made by and for Catholics. Check out fidei.email. That's FIDEI.email. Built for Catholic individuals, families, organizations, and groups. They're private, secure, and of course, they're Catholic. And they're offering 2 months off on your first year for an annual subscription if you enter the coupon code Return to Tradition without spaces. That's the name of this channel, without spaces, at checkout. The Synod on Synodality has been the gift that really and truly keeps on giving. You see, the Synod on Synodality may have ended several days ago, but that hasn't actually stopped anybody in the church from using now the Synod and this decentralization schema and this new liturgy that they're talking about. Yes, they are talking about a new Mass and talking about it very openly. They're now talking about what they want to see from this, because it's not just traditionalist alarmism. This is something they're honestly talking about. So Gloria TV, headline: Polish Cardinal wants liturgical reform. The Eucharist must be synodal, less priest-centered. The Eucharist is not priest-centered. The Eucharist is Christ-centered, especially when the priest is actually facing liturgical east, meaning he has his back to the people when offering the Mass, because he is orienting himself entirely to God. And he faces that direction because, liturgically speaking, the church is constantly taught that's the direction for God. And when he faces that direction, he is facing what he's worshiping, and he is acting as the head of the body worshiping, meaning the parish, meaning you and I. We're all in it together. He is the head, because he is the one offering the sacrifice. It's not priest-centered, it's God-centered. God-centered liturgy isn't necessarily something that a lot of these more strident folks have been wanting in the church in the last few decades. They talk about the era of being man-centered. That was stuff that they talked about in the 60s. We were opening the windows of the church to the world to get some wisdom of the world into the church, to reorient ourselves towards man and his condition, as if we weren't supposed to be focused on God almost entirely. And they're taking their opportunity to take the next logical step here, as you will see in this piece from Gloria TV, there, the news service there. From the article, quote, liturgical reform has not yet taken place, said Cardinal Ryś, 60, of Lodz, Poland, at a press conference in Rome on the 27th of October. He, the cardinal, believes that the liturgy cannot be the action of one priest, but must be synodal with the participation of all. The news outlet he had spoken to asked Cardinal Ryś about the final document of the Extraordinary Synod, which draws an analogy between Eucharistic and synodal assemblies. Cardinal Ryś is a member of the dicastery for the liturgy. Let's pause. You have a member of the dicastery for the liturgy being right up front with you and drawing a distinction between the Eucharistic assembly, that means the holy sacrifice of the Mass, and whatever this new synodal thing they're going to do. They're drawing a distinction there, and this is a high-ranking official in the dicastery of the liturgy, the Roman Curia body whose main job it is to govern all things related to the liturgy. Anytime if you hear a story about Pope Francis, say, rewriting the Our Father for Italy, it would have come through this. If you hear a story about, some new feast day, and it's has a new calendar and a new section for the Novus Ordo Missae, it's coming through this place, at least partially. It's a very important, especially important dicastery in Rome. And here he is talking about how the Mass must be synodal with participation of all. This active participation stuff has been their rallying cry since well before Vatican II. Even Pope St. Pius X paid some service to this by saying the way to address active participation is to have people, the laity, praying the hymns or singing the hymns with the priest at a high Mass and praying the Our Father aloud with the priest. That was enough active participation for him, or you could pray a rosary during the Mass or anything else as long as you united your prayers to the priest at the altar. But that has never been good enough for this revolutionary group in the church. They want a truly synodal liturgy where you are truly active in the Mass. Okay, this is him acknowledging the distinctions between the synodal group hug liturgy that they've been talking about, and the Eucharistic assembly, meaning the Mass, and then trying to erase that distinction. Again, a new Mass is coming if they get their way. Here's what he says. Quote, his vision of the Eucharist, quoting him directly, the liturgy has a comprehensible language. The priest has turned towards the congregation. New books have been published, but the liturgy still looks like a one-actor theater, i.e. there is a priest, and that is the end of the gathering of active people in the church. It means that the reform has not taken place. To which they respond, Ryś should open his eyes and look around because there were places where his fantasies were put into practice, but nothing remains of them. End quote. Meaning the most liberalized places in the church for the Mass have no attendance at Mass anymore, or virtually none. But he is saying something at least vaguely truthful there. There is this sense. I've heard one seminarian describe it this way. This was a seminarian who described it, the new Mass, at times in the more blatantly irreverent expressions of it, looking like the Eucharistic cooking show. And that was a seminarian saying this, somebody who got screened and made it to seminary in a very, very conservative diocese, where the bishop there takes very seriously the quality of men he allows to enter the seminary. And that's how he described it. I want to identify who this person was, the seminarian after all, but that's how they've described it. And that's what he's kind of describing here too, in the weirdest way. But instead of the Catholic solution to this problem being, let's elevate the sacred, sense of the sacred at the Mass, at the new Mass and at the old. Instead of elevating the sense of the sacred, let's make it more man-centered. That's what synodality is at the end of the day, is man-centeredness. Everything we're talking about today, it's man-centered, your own interior feelings and all that nonsense as the entire source and summit of your faith. It's little wonder that a lot of people no longer believe in the Eucharist anymore, believe in the real presence, that many Catholics acknowledge what the church says about the real presence, and they believe it's just a symbol anyway, instead of truly containing the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord. Because we have stopped treating sacred things like they are sacred things. That anime story from earlier is an example of that. Not treating sacred imagery like sacred imagery anymore. It's why we should object to AI representations of sacred images. Because we have divorced the sacred from the truly authentic Catholic experience. And we've just watered it all down. All of this stuff is connected. Synodality may end up being a curse on the church. It's not going to be a new springtime as they talk about it. You remember, they've been talking about a new springtime in the church since about 1965. And now they're doubling down on attempting to kick off a new springtime and what can only be described as, Laura says, self-centeredness, man-centeredness. We need to put God back at the center through sacred art, truly reverent worship, and of course, living as Catholics do. And we as Catholics, who are traditionally minded, that's why I use that term, can, despite our other differences, debate what those mean among ourselves, but at least try to live it in practice when we go to Mass and hope that our priest will give us good Masses and the other things that go with that. St. Vincent of Lerins told us, I brought you the commentatory from him, when you see novelty introduced in the church, your duty is to cling to the faith. He says that repeatedly throughout his work, and he's a doctor of the church. So listen to him on this. He was dealing with the crisis of the followers of Arius back in the 4th century. And it equally applies to today. Stay Catholic. Don't follow these people seeking novelty. Cling to the faith. Thanks very much for tuning in today. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.